Hi there. One of the biggest issues I've found with high school students is that they still sometimes struggle to write full sentences. I think the reason behind this is quite simply that we don't understand what makes up a sentence, and we need to take a look at clauses, main clauses, subordinate clauses, and the general rules of the two things that you need for a sentence to be a sentence. So let's have a look. Right, so by definition, a sentence has to contain two things: a subject and a verb. If it has those, it can function as a main clause. A main clause is a full sentence. We'll also look obviously at subordinate clauses, but as long as you have an independent subject and a verb, you have the makings of a full sentence. And of course, we mustn't forget capital letters and punctuation marks. At first glance, this looks like a complete sentence, sitting alone and watching TV in the lounge. It might be a piece of poetry, but there is something missing here. Well, we do have two verbs, sitting and watching, so that's alright. But we don't seem to have a subject. Is it Snuffles, Whiffles, or your Auntie Peggy watching TV? We don't know who's doing this action. So, we need to ask, what is the subject? Okay, so if we look at this a bit more critically, sitting alone and watching TV in the lounge, we now know that's not a complete sentence. So, how can we fix it? Well, we could add a subject. She was sitting alone and watching TV in the lounge. Or we could do something even more interesting. Treat it as a subordinate clause. While sitting alone and watching TV in the lounge, Lucy eventually fell asleep. Now your sentence has some body, something interesting to it. While, by the way, is a subordinate conjunction. We'll talk about those later. And, of course, Lucy eventually fell asleep is a main clause. It can stand on its own, so you really don't need anything else. Perhaps I'm throwing in too much here. Let's look carefully at Lucy eventually fell asleep. What makes it a main clause or a full sentence on its own? It has a subject and a verb. On its own, this can stand alone. In other words, well, it's a full sentence. Or, as we said again, a main clause. So just to go back to basics one more time, let's have a look at the following. A two-word sentence. Two words, a subject and a verb, and yes, it's a full sentence. Have a look. Lucy snored. Okay, we've got Lucy, the subject of our sentence, and we got snored, a past tense verb. This functions as a main clause. That means it needs nothing else and it can stand on its own. You cannot write a sentence without a main clause. But then also consider that your favorite stories would be very boring if this is all they contained. So, we need to add some detail. Let's have a look at that subordinate clause. Obviously, if we want to give it a bit of flavor, we add in details. In this case, a subordinate clause. While she slept, Lucy snored. This makes it more interesting. Subordinate means less important, but in a way it's actually very important to add these in. You'll notice the little caption says, "I need your main clause." The subordinate clause needs the main clause. It cannot stand on its own, and that's very often where we fall short in writing full sentences. I spoke earlier about subordinate conjunctions. Now if that's a word that's new to you, think about the junction of a road where two roads meet. Conjunctions join or combine ideas. So subordinate conjunctions are subordinating, joining ideas. Have a look at the following list, and I hope it's useful. I'll leave it up for a few seconds. You can pause your video and write it down. Subordinating or subordinate conjunctions. Once again, thanks for watching. I hope that was useful. I do plan to put in a second part to this topic so that you can test yourself. But in the meantime, all you got to remember is to look at your full sentences. Do they have capital letters? Is there a punctuation mark at the end? Does it contain a subject? Does it contain a verb? And the bits and pieces in between. As long as you remember those rules, you should be writing in full sentences. Cheers.